Hi, everybody. Welcome back. It is my great pleasure and honor to introduce Dr. Richard Bedlack as our keynote presenter. Dr. Bedlack is the Stewart Hughes and Went Distinguished Professor of ALS and leader of the ALS program at Duke University. He started and still runs the ALS Clinical Research Learning Institute, which empowers people living with ALS to be even better research advocates. He also runs the ALS Untangled program, which helps people make more informed decisions about alternative and off-label treatments. His research focuses on outliers who have very slow disease progression and those who recover lost motor function. He believes that hope is a powerful medicine and is constantly trying to get better at boosting it. He lives in North Carolina with his wife, Shelley, 2 mischievous cats, and a closet full of eye-catching blazers. Dr. Bedlack, welcome, Dr. Bedlack.
Very nice introduction. Thank you for that. Most people just say the old guy with the nice suits. Give them a minute to get my slides up here. Everybody having fun here in DC? Yeah. It's been pretty awesome. All right. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about what has become my favorite topic, and it's hope. And it starts with the question that I most commonly get asked now after 25 years in this field by my family and my friends. They say, Bedlack, what exactly is it that you do? And I tell them I get up every day and I go to battle with a monster called ALS. And it is a monster. It's huge and it terrifies me most of the time. But I will say in my 25 years, we have found some weapons that we can use against this beast. The most important of those, I would argue, is multidisciplinary team care. You know, that builds a foundation upon which everything else that we do is built. And there's no question that people who come to these multidisciplinary clinics, their quality of life is consistently better, they're less likely to be hospitalized, and they live much longer compared to people who don't. We also have medications. I would argue we actually have our first home run medication, which is tofersen, for the one small subset of people who have ALS because of an SOD1 gene. I don't know if you've talked about this before this past week, but we now know that people who are on that for more than 2 years, most of them have stabilized. And about 20% of them are significantly stronger than they were 2 years ago. There's even an example of someone who was wheelchair bound who walks now. So that's what we need for the other 99% of ALS cases. We've got some new information about exercises. So for example, we now know that people with ALS who exercise do better medically than people who don't. We didn't know that for a long time. And in fact, there's one specific type of exercise called respiratory muscle training that most of us are educating our patients about. It's a type of breathing exercise. It's been shown to preserve speech and swallowing as well as breathing in the disease. We've got all kinds of equipment, and you see a lot of examples of it in this room, things that allow people with ALS to go out and live a more full life. And we've got nutrition. And for a long time, all we knew about nutrition was you got to avoid losing weight, and that's still really important. But in the past year, we actually learned that there's one type of diet that's probably the best for most people with ALS. It's called a high glycemic index diet, a diet that raises your blood sugar. That's associated with the slowest ALS progression. And then I would say there's one more thing. And to me, again, over the past year especially, this has become so important. I think it's underutilized. I think it's underappreciated. It's hope. The definitions of hope I like the best are a combination of optimism and agency, a state of positivity, which is accompanied by having goals, finding pathways to achieve those goals, and then finding the motivation to go down those pathways. I think hope is so much more than just an emotion. I think it's more even than a coping strategy. I've come to believe that hope is a treatment. Now, why do I think this? If you look across just about every disease where hope has been studied, those that have more of it do much better than those with less of it. So they have a better quality of life. Again, they're less likely to be hospitalized. They live much longer if they're more hopeful. So I've asked myself, where does hope come from? And I don't think it comes from the same place in everyone. I think there's some people that are just born with it, including a lot of the people in this room. No matter what you ran into, you were going to be able to be hopeful. That's amazing. Sometimes it has to come from someone's circle, from their family, from their friends. I call that the often awesome army because of a person I met with ALS who had an army early in my career. But I think sometimes it comes from a person's clinician, mainly their doctor. So if you look at studies of hope in cancer, and that's where most of them are done, if you ask people with really advanced cancer, where does your hope come from? The vast majority of them say mostly it comes from my doctor. And it turns out that in the cancer literature, there are hope boosting and also hope suppressing physician behaviors that have been identified. And I've wondered, how come those are not taught to us in medical school or residency? Even if you knew about them, you would see that they're going to be challenging in today's medical system. They're going to be challenging because we haven't been educated about them. They're going to be challenging because we are under incredible time pressure now. All of our bosses want us to see more patients. And it's very difficult to embrace those hope-boosting behaviors if you're in and out of there in 5 minutes. The other thing that I'm seeing more and more of, and again, frankly, it terrifies me, is burnout. I'm gonna tell you that I would say the vast majority of American physicians across every specialty are experiencing symptoms of burnout now. And one of the big ones is loss of empathy. And if you don't have empathy, you can't be a good hope booster. So let me tell you over the last 25 years about the approach that I've developed, and I call it stitching strength. And it has to start with me. I've got to recognize that I'm vulnerable to burnout. And how do I get around that? Well, self-care. I can't be showing up to clinic if I'm hungry, if I'm angry, if I'm feeling lonely or I'm feeling tired. I got to make sure that all those things are taken care of. I've got to force things into my life that I know bring me joy. And one of those is the clothes. So ever since I was a kid, I've just recognized if I put on something that's really wacky, colorful, crazy pattern, it's like a suit of armor for me. It allows me to preserve my positivity no matter what I run into. And I've also found that the clothes rub off on other people. I can't tell you how many smiles I saw today related to this pink outfit and how many pictures I've taken today. I've also been very fortunate to meet a ton of creative people who've loved this mashup of fashion and neurology and have wanted to partner with me to design custom made pieces of clothing that honor people living with ALS. So there on the left-hand side, you see that blue suit, which is covered in symbols of lessons I learned from people with ALS. So on the pant leg, that's a motor neuron. And the lesson there is don't take little things in your life for granted. How many of us wake up every day and are grateful that we have motor neurons? Nobody, unless one day they don't work. And then all of a sudden you realize, wow, that's a really important part of the body. And so I make a gratitude list every day of all the little things I have in my life that I'm thankful for. On the sleeve, that's a Greek symbol of the god of Asclepius. He was the god of healing. And it just reminds me, until the day comes when I can fix ALS, I can heal people on the inside, where it matters most, spiritually. And then you see a blue cornflower on the lower panel of the jacket. You probably know that's a symbol of resilience, because blue cornflowers, like a person with ALS, when you first see them, they look really fragile, but they're tough as hell. They can maintain their beautiful color through the harshest winter. On the upper panel of the jacket, that's a swallow, which I've come to think of as a symbol of hope. And then you can't see the back, but there's a UFO on the back. And that's because I've learned that my patients want me to investigate even the wildest ideas. I sometimes feel like Fox Mulder from the X-Files, the things that I'm tracking down and trying to figure out if they're real. But I've gotten to work with people like the guy in the upper right-hand corner, Manuel Cuevas, somebody I've been reading about since I was a kid. He's the tailor that put Johnny Cash in black for the first time. He's the tailor that designed Elvis Presley's gold lame suit, recently done something for Lady Gaga. And believe it or not, he lost a loved one to ALS. And so I went out to meet him, and he wound up making a bunch of things for me, including that jacket that's covered in symbols of different families that have helped me in my mission to end ALS. And I've even got people working on custom-made sneakers. That's the guy who does all the spikes for the NFL and all the sneakers for the NBA. And I'm the first neurologist that he ever designed sneakers for. So we got motor neurons and fight ALS on the back. I've also found that I've got to understand people. Like a person sitting in front of me that I'm diagnosing with ALS is so much more than that, right? That's a small part of who they are. I've got to understand the other parts of them to be the best possible hope booster. And so I got to spend time with them. I got to ask them questions about things other than ALS. Ideally, I would spend time with them outside of clinic. So I've traveled the world. I've gone to some places I never in my wildest dreams imagined I would go to see my patients doing things. And hopefully I brought them some spiritual support. I know they brought me a lot of positivity and joy. And there's no example like this one. I mean, this was a woman named Andrea Peach has given me permission to talk about her case, but I diagnosed her over 10 years ago. I think she was around 30 years old. She was a triathlete. And as I was trying to break the news to her, she put up her hand and said, "You don't have to worry about me. I already know what I'm going to do. I'm going to be the first person with ALS to do a marathon in all 50 states. And my jaw kind of dropped. And I said, "That's a high bar, but I want to see it. So please let me know when you get close to 50, because I got to be there." And, I was thinking in my mind, if we make it to 50, it's probably going to be North Carolina or South Carolina. Well, she called me up one day and she said, "Doc, you remember that promise? 50's coming up. Prince of Wales Island, Alaska." I didn't realize that was still in the United States after all the plane rides and boat rides and van rides, but I was there, and I got to say it's one of the greatest things I've ever seen in my life. Also, I realize words matter. Like physicians often use words, and I don't think they think about the power of what's coming out of their mouth. I always use the term if things get worse, not when things get worse. And the reality is we don't know. There are people whose ALS has stopped progressing. There are people who recovered from ALS. So we don't know, looking at somebody, what's going to happen. And I think it's really important, especially when you sit down with someone for the first time, that breaking the news kind of sets the tone for the whole rest of your relationship. I cannot tell you how many times, and I still hear this from people who come to me from other clinics. Somebody was sat down and said, "You got ALS, you got 2 to 3 years to live. Go home and get your affairs in order." Like, think about what that does to that person when they leave clinic. Like, their whole life is now just boxed in. All they can see in front of them is ALS and an expiration date. And it's not even accurate scientifically. You cannot look at a person the first time you meet them and know that they have that long to live. So the way I like to break the news is a lot longer, but I explain, hey, this disease, it can be disabling, it can be life-shortening, but it doesn't have to define you. You're much more than this. And people do so differently. I mean, there are many examples of people in my clinic who've been alive with it for more than 10 years and still have great lives. Stephen Hawking had it for more than 50 years, had one of the most amazing lives ever recorded. And there's even people that recover from it. So I tell them, we've got a lot of resources to offer you today. We're going to go over you from head to toe. We're going to try to compensate for every little thing that we see the disease trying to take away. And then we want you to go live your life. And you'll come back in a few months and we'll do this again. And if things have changed, we'll change the options. But don't be defined by this. I've also found, as you get to know someone, that the specific hopes of a person vary. You can't assume that everyone's hopeful about the same thing. And I think this may be another reason some of my colleagues have not embraced this, is they probably shrug their shoulders and say, well, of course, everyone's going to say they want to be cured. Actually, if you ask people, that's not what they say at all. They hardly ever say that. So we started this about a year and a half ago now. The first thing we ask people when they walk into clinic is not, "What are you here to complain about today?" which is what every other medical doctor does, including my medical doctor once a year when I go in. "What are you here to complain about today?" Think about how that makes you feel. Instead, we say, "What are you hopeful about today? Tell us 2 or 3 things you're hopeful about." And when you understand what people are hopeful about, you can tailor your resources to help them realize those hopes. So some of the things that people have said, "I'm hopeful that some of my measurements will be stable or maybe better than last time. I hope to feel useful." That's a really common one I hear. "I hope to be able to try some new experimental option." And then one of my favorite recent ones, "I hope to be able to get back into some of the clothes that I used to love." And so let me show you how this can personalize treatment. Some of my measurements will stabilize or improve. So In the clinic, unfortunately, there are certain things that we absolutely have to measure. We have to measure your function. We typically use something called an ALS functional rating scale. We have to measure your breathing. We have to measure your strength. And the reason is these measurements help us decide what options to talk about today. We don't want to just unload every option the first time we meet someone. Also, payers are scrutinizing what we write in your chart, and they're not going to pay for things unless we have the right verbiage in there. Unfortunately, those measurements are often worse, not always. And so if we see a plateau or an improvement, we really make sure to highlight that. But Dr. James Pluzogins, who's become sort of one of my heroes, somebody who's definitely shaped the rest of my career, wrote this beautiful blog a while ago. And he said, when I go to clinic, I appreciate everything that people say and do, but I can't help sometimes feeling a little sad because so many measurements are worse. And he said, what if you incorporated measurements in clinic of things that didn't have to be touched by ALS? I thought, this is brilliant. And I remember presenting this to my team when I saw that blog post, and my PA said, oh yeah, I've been checking people's ability to feel vibration in their foot with a tuning fork. And I said, I just thought you didn't really know how to do an exam in a person with ALS. I thought that was just an extraneous piece of information. And she said, no, I want to show them that parts of their nervous system are just fine. And so Dr. Pluzogins came up with something which is originally called the turbocharged living scale. Now we call it a tool, but it forces us to ask people about parts of them that are way more important than their strength that can flourish in the face of ALS, like adaptability, humor, kindness, compassion, altruism. So we are now doing this in patients in our clinic, and it's an amazing, intervention, I would call it. It only takes a few minutes, but you can see the face of the patient and the family just light up when you recognize all these parts of them that are thriving. Hope to feel useful. I see this as an invitation to talk about research. I do it in everyone anyway, but when somebody says that, I say, have you ever heard of natural history studies? Let me explain how important these are and how you can help us to understand the cause of ALS, why people do so much better than others. You should generate a natural history database that we can use for clinical trials. Also, I tell them about advocacy opportunities, like the ones through IMALS and the ones through the ALS Clinical Research Learning Institute. If you don't know what that is, it's a crash course in how to understand research, talk about it, and influence it that I'm doing with a bunch of my Niels colleagues. We've actually held, I think, 33 of these clinical research learning institutes now. We've trained close to 800 people with ALS to be research advocates. I can guarantee you they feel useful. Hope to try experimental products. Of course, like any doctor who doesn't spend time on this does not understand the disease. Of course, if you have a disease like this, you want to try experimental things. Now, my preferred way for trying experimental things is through trials. So I'm always careful to try to figure out, is this person sitting in front of me a candidate for any trial? Unfortunately, most of my patients aren't. And so for those that can't get into a trial, there's things called expanded access programs, which you all helped us get federal funding for. There's more of them than ever, but there's still not nearly enough. And so between trials and EAPs, I'm going to say it's about 5% of everybody with ALS that gets those options. 95% don't. So what does that mean? 95% of people have to self-experiment with products that are sold on the internet, things I call alternative and off-label treatments. So this one was, again, one that really touched me because I told you how much I love clothes. But one time recently, one of my patients said, I can't wear the things I love, the colorful, stylish things. They're too tight. They have too many zippers and buttons, and it's just too much for my caregiver. So I said, that's not something that ALS should have to take away from a person. I reached out to my colleagues at the NC State Fashion School, and now they have a whole class every year on adaptive fashion, where they start the class with a Zoom meeting with my different stylish patients, and they hear from those patients, what do they like to wear and why can't they wear it? And then they go to work and they design lines of clothing for my patients. And this is now like gaining steam. I've heard about some other fashion schools that are interested. I met some fashion students yesterday on the Hill who asked me about one of my jackets, and I explained this program, and they're all kind of Googling it on their phone. So there's a huge untapped market out there. I mean, why mainstream designers have not recognized this? I mean, 30,000 people with ALS There could be 30 million people with different disabilities who cannot wear the kind of clothes they want to wear because they don't exist. That's a huge market for a designer that decides to get into this space. All right, so is this the slide now with the video? So I look back over my career, I realize I'm getting pretty old. You can probably see it. And I say to myself, I need to get this down. Like, I think I've discovered something. If it was a medicine, I'd be writing down the formula and publishing it. But I've developed an approach that I think makes a difference. And I want to make sure that the world always remembers this, how to stay resilient, how to stay positive, how to be a good hope booster. So I made a movie and I wanted to show you the preview.
I've had to lose one at a time, a lot of the things I love. I can't hike. I can lose the mountain I used to hike, but I can't hike.
Before 2014, I think most people knew it better as Lou Gehrig's disease. But in 2014, the Ice Bucket Challenge happened, and all of a sudden everybody knew it by its proper name, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS. As this disease progresses, you know what you want to do, but you can't do it anymore.
We were in New York at a play, and I had some Tic Tacs, and they kept falling out of my mouth. I literally couldn't keep them in.
And so it gradually takes away your ability to walk, to speak, to swallow, and eventually to breathe.
I remember looking at the band and saying, there's something wrong with me.
He lost his ability to walk and could not hold our children.
For every single case, it is a death sentence. Not a lot to be seemingly hopeful for, right? And yet, hope finds a way to muscle its way in.
I'm Dr. Rick Bedlack. I run the Duke ALS program, and I've spent my life trying to figure out how to create options and hope.
Dr. Bedlack's positive energy rubbed off on me.
His clothing disarms people and instantly creates a bonded experience.
I've always found it's kind of like putting on a suit of armor, and I see that it rubs off on other people, so it's a win-win.
Your style is so badass, Rob.
Hope is going to be a huge part of what I do until we find a way to end this disease.
He wants to be one of the guys that help cure ALS.
This disease is not hopeless by any stretch. We're making incredible progress every day.
We shouldn't let a single label like ALS define us. We should be who we want to be.
The word was, you have ALS, but let me show you what the possibilities are.
I think if anybody's going to find a cure, it's going to be him.
Just so you know, that's not me saying I'm going to be the one to find the cure. That's my dad. Now, if your dad doesn't believe in you, what do you got, right? So he had to have a cameo in the movie, too. He insisted. Well, so, I mean, this is an approach that takes time. Obviously, this career, it's not a 9-to-5 job. It's like my life. I mean, I'm working on ALS every night and every weekend, and I've got a very understanding wife, but not everyone is going to be able to do what I do exactly the way I do it. And so I've thought a lot about this and talked to Peggy and her family about this, and talked to Andrea Pete, who's also one of the most hopeful people I've ever met. And we've decided we need to do a project where we test like a simple hope boosting intervention to see, does this thing, if we incorporate it into clinic, does it boost hope scores? And can we show that people with ALS who have higher hope scores ultimately do better medically? And so this is launched, funded by Hummingbird and Team Drea. We're using that turbocharged living tool, and we're assessing its effect on hope scores and ultimately on progression and longevity with this disease. And it's going to be multi-site now. UVA's got some sites that are coming on. Temple wants to come on. So if you have other clinics that might want to come onto this, it's a lot easier than a trial because it's considered to be a quality improvement project by our IRB. So this is what I would say to someone who just doesn't buy this, who doesn't see the need to engage in hope boosting in their clinic. If you don't do it, if you don't give your patients hope in clinic, guess where they're going to find it? They're going to go home and they're going to find it on the internet. And I think just about everybody in the space realizes not everybody who's advertising on the internet is legit, is doing something that's validated, is even honest. There are numerous examples of harm that have come to people who've been driven to the internet because they had no other hope. and they gave somebody money and they went and got something that was called an experimental therapy, and they were harmed physically, psychologically, financially by those people. So I would argue that it's almost malpractice not to develop a hope boosting strategy in an ALS clinic. So I just leave you with this quote that's kind of come to define this sort of home stretch of my career. Carry a light and you need not fear the darkness. I don't think there's any situation that's too dark to have hope, and I'm going to keep shining my light as bright as I can for as long as I can. So thanks for listening today, and I'll be happy to take questions.